Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear. I can see there's some people still connecting. I'll let everyone try and connect to the audio. There we go. Hello, everyone. So we're recording the session as always. This session is part of our series of digital mentoring sessions, the last one of which was on safeguarding. So if you haven't seen that one, it's worth going back to. That was a really useful conversation. Today's session is on publishing and open access in particular. A really, really important one, because I know some of the outputs that are coming out of lots of the projects are written outputs. They're outputs that you want to get out into the world in that kind of more formal way through a journal article or something like that. And it can be quite a complex world, especially if it's not a world you're used to. Sometimes there's more steps in it than you imagine. And so today's session is really to go through things that are useful to know about that world, and some things to watch out for as you navigate, including some of the ways you can kind of get extra help and support if you're thinking about the kind of publishing route and that sort of academic publishing route. And the other bit that we'll be covering today is around something called open access, which is basically making sure that people can get to our work without paying extra money to get to it. Okay, so making sure that it's freely available to those who don't maybe have a very expensive library to rely on. And that's really important for a lot of the work we're all doing in terms of who needs to access it, because they might not have those expensive libraries to rely on. It's also really important for us because the money that we all spend through our projects is UK government money. And it comes through one of the funding bodies in the UK government, which means there's a condition attached that says we want it to be open access and we want other people to be able to access that work without paying extra money. So the government are kind of saying, well, we've already paid for it, so we don't want people to have to pay for it again. However, we're really lucky to have Judith Hegenbarth here with us. Judith's the head of research skills in the university, and Suzanne Atkins, who's our open access expert in the University of Birmingham. And they know all of this inside out, back to front. They do it all the time. So we're really lucky to have them with us to go through it in a lot more detail, and then to take any questions that anyone has towards the end. So Judith, can I hand over to you?
Yes, certainly. I'm going to try and share. I can't share my screen at the moment, but I guess if
that is my fault.
That's okay.
You should be able to do it now.
Cool. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that introduction. I hope we know a little bit, I'm not sure inside out, but a little bit, hopefully enough to be of use to you. Yeah, thank you for asking us to come along. We're going to take it in turns. I'm going to start off by sort of talking a little bit about, not theory exactly, but a little bit about what publishing means as part of the research process, and then what we mean by the open access that Ben was referring to, and then thinking about other ways to be open as well, other things that we can share, places we can put things so that our colleagues and practitioners can find things, so thinking about maybe open research a bit more broadly. And then Suzanne's going to talk around some of the practice in this. Okay, well, that's all fair enough. Actually, how do I do this? So we'll split it in that way. So I hope it'll be useful. Just stop me at any stage if there are questions, or pop something into chat and we'll deal with that as we go along. So I thought it might be useful to start off with a quick diagram of what we might think of as the research cycle. So starting off with when you plan a project and work out what you want to do right at the beginning, at the top, and then doing all the work that you're probably doing at the moment, going out and discovering things, measuring things, or asking people things, and doing that work, and then bringing that material back that you've got, whether that's data or it's text, whatever it is, and then doing that analysis bit so that you can discern some patterns or whatever it is in your work. Then you obviously want to share that with people. You want to let them know what you've discovered, and you want to let them know about the patterns that you found. And this is where today's session comes in on that cycle. This is where we're looking at today. And it's that writing bit, writing it all up, and then publishing. And it's that publishing bit that we're going to think about. That's where it fits before you then start going out to tell people at conferences, perhaps, or some of these parts will move around the life cycle, but it's this bit that we're gonna concentrate on today. So just thinking right back to the beginning, right back to when people started publishing things, this is a photograph of 1665, a long time ago, Royal Society proceedings. So this is where you would usually have a man who was very successful and rich, probably, who had time and money to do some scientific research in their own home, potentially, and was kind of wanting to tell people about it. And often this would be the result. It would be a journal that came out, and this is one of the very first ones. I need to tell people about the science that I'm doing. And at this point, it was quite a privileged few people that would have the ability to get hold of these proceedings and indeed write in them. And it was a very small thing, but you would have to pay to understand what was going on in this, and you would have to be, you know, in the top 1% of the population that was educated enough to be able to read that. Since then, of course, things have changed, and science and other, we sort of say science, but we mean research of any sort, is now, it's a career that we hope as many people as possible. You know, there are still a lot of inequalities, but this is a bigger picture now, and more people are able to do that research. And there's more funding from government, as we know, from many governments, to enable people to do that research. But often we still have to pay to access that research. And what we want to do today is think about, actually, let's make that be available to as many people as possible, so they can read it and they can maybe try and reproduce some of the work that's gone on, that they can show that that work is true or valid, because we know how they did it, we know what their methods were, and we could maybe reproduce that at some stage. So publishing tells people how we've done that research, and it makes it, you tell people how you've gone about it, so it's more valid, if you like. So that's a little bit around the sort of history of that scholarly communication, if you like. Now, you've probably come up against this when you have tried to search for some information, possibly on Google Scholar or something like that. You may well have come up against a paywall, and you want to access something, but it says, no, you can't do that unless you know, pay $30 or whatever it is using your credit card. That's really, really frustrating. And I'm sure you've probably experienced those moments. We're really lucky, those of us on screen at the moment here at the University of Birmingham, because we have a lot of subscriptions to journals. So we are in a privileged position. We can access a lot of stuff, but still not everything. And we still, as academics and researchers and librarians, still can't always access everything. That's really, really frustrating. And of course, if you're in practice somewhere, you're not attached or affiliated to an institution, or you're affiliated to a smaller university, there will be less that you are able to access. Again, this is another really good reason why open access is such an important movement, really, to try and get information out there. There is a link on this slide to a movie that's on YouTube. Like, this is open access, but it's called The Business of Scholarship. And it's kind of around, if you are interested in some of the politics around this, you know, there is a sort of free labor going on often, where academics will put in their work and we have to buy it back so that we can read it. And again, another really good reason why open access is such a good idea. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this just gives you a little indication of what happens in open access at Birmingham in particular, and this will be similar to a lot of other institutions if you're affiliated to a different institution. It just shows you that there are different ways of making your work open. One is by submitting it to a regular publisher, many of whom now could and should have different processes by which that work is made open, sometimes via a payment that Suzanne's going to tell us more about, because there are ways to have that covered. And that payment isn't for the researcher to cover, but for the institution or the funder that you work with. So that can be through that sort of normal channel, or you can put self-archive, it's called. You can put your own version onto our repository as long as the terms are right. And Suzanne will tell us a little bit more about that. But this is to show you that there is a process, and we'll be talking to you about that in a bit more detail. We've got a nice link there to a web page, which will tell you more, but again, Suzanne will explain that. So there are other ways as well to be open. We probably are mostly today talking about journal articles or reports of your work at the end of the project, the outputs, if you like. There are other things to think about though, and other ways to be open. And you might be wanting to think about, well, I'm going to be collecting a lot of data, and I've got some really valuable files here, some data sets, if you like, that somebody else might be able to use if the conditions are right, and I'll explain what those are a bit later on. But also software, so you might have written a bit of code that helps you analyze a particular bit of data. People will share that code sometimes, again, if that's okay, to save themselves and the future people coming beyond a bit of time. And there are also other things that they'll share. So you might, for example, want to write a blog post about the project that you've done so that people can see that. And you might want to, of course, tell people you've got that blog post. You might want to write for a local newspaper, or for there's something in the UK called The Conversation, for example, which is like academic journalism. Or there might be publications which are less academic and more for practitioners. So you might want to consider writing something there and making that open. And you might want to tell people about you and your role as a researcher, and thinking about making your profile open as well. So it's worth kind of thinking a little bit further actually than articles sometimes. Going back to the data side of things, you might say, well, I can't possibly share my data, and that's absolutely fine. There's a sort of idea that you could be as open as possible, but as closed as necessary. If you have, a data set which is interview transcripts from participants that you cannot share, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to share that. But if you have a data set which is about climate or something else which has less confidentiality concerns, you could think about sharing it. You could indeed put some data set somewhere and make it closed, but just tell people what that data is about, so that they could, in the future, somebody could find that this exists at least, and maybe contact you and say, oh, I believe you have a data set about a certain thing. And then you could discuss the terms. Could it be shared? Could you at least discuss the project? So sharing those data sets can often lead to different new collaborations, or could mean that somebody else could have the benefit of your data and use it in a slightly different way. And as well as you sharing your own data, you might be able to sort of be more of a consumer and look for somebody else's data set that somebody else has shared. And there's quite a nice tool called Re3Data, and it's 3 because the re bit is registry and research and repositories. But this is where lots of people, all these different repositories can be searched by a particular keyword, and you can find out actually if a data set already exists that you might be able to reuse. So that's quite an interesting new thing that kind of being open offers us now. And then there are 2 tools here. Again, what I've tried to do is put things here that aren't necessarily Birmingham focused. These are agnostic, if you like. They're available for everybody in the world to use. Zenodo is something that was set up by the CERN project, which happens in Switzerland, where that Large Hadron Collider is. They have created a big place where you can put a data set, or you can put even some conference slides, or a paper that's not necessarily quite been published yet, you can put those onto that repository and other people will be able to link in and find that work. And then on the right hand side is a little snapshot from GitHub where people put code particularly and allow other people to use their code or reuse it or build on it to do some work like that. Just gone a little bit too far there, so I'm just going to see if I can go back a step. Right, let me go back. There we go. This is the blog bit that I mentioned, and just to show you, there are, I think, some blogs in the university. If you are thinking maybe of writing in a less traditional style, or you want to sort of tell other academics what you're doing in a sort of slightly more lay way, or just a shorter piece of work, that it's possible to look at many universities have a sort of list of different blogs. I've just taken a snapshot of one from one that exists at the university. Again, this is a way of letting people know about the work that you're doing and then linking in. And sometimes if you approach the author, the person that looks after the blog, and say, would you like a guest blog post, they will often say, yes, please, because it's really hard to keep a blog going. It's a lot of work. You may be able to find a guest slot to write for a blog like that. So that's another way of maybe thinking about yourself as an author in a less traditional way. And then I think I mentioned the profile bit. This is something called ORCID. It stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID. And it gives you a profile. It gives you a 16-digit code. So it's like you having an ISBN that a book has. It's the same kind of thing to save you being confused with a different researcher with a similar name. And it also gives you the opportunity to show people who you are, where your affiliation is, what your research interests are. And then when you start adding papers, if you have published something, or a link to the blog, if you do have a blog post, then it just allows people to find you and to find all the work that you've done. And I've just taken a snapshot of Kirsten's. I hope she doesn't mind me showing this one. So this is Kirsten's ORCID. And it very simply shows her affiliations. And as you scroll down that screen, it will show you Kirsten's papers as well. So it's another way of being open and showing people online exactly what work you're involved with. Okay, so we're moving now from that sort of, here's all the other things you can do, to the section where I'm going to hand over to Suzanne. This is particularly where the practical part comes in. That's all very well, but actually how do I start this? So I'm going to hand over to Suzanne.
Thank you. Should we move to the next slide, Judith? So obviously, generally, there's lots of benefits about being open. Obviously, more people can read it. People you may not realise who would find your research relevance. There suddenly may have more funding opportunities for you or career opportunities for you. Practitioners can read it, as well as people who are attached to institutions that have paywall subscription content. So there are real benefits, but it's, as was pointed out earlier, it's also being worth aware that many funders in the UK particularly, including UK Research and Innovation, have open access as a condition of any agreements. And obviously GC, RF are funded essentially by UK Research and Innovation. So what I will cover is kind of the practical terms of how you can publish as open access. I won't go too much into funding, but I will return to that. But also, hopefully this will give you some tools that as you move away from this funded project, you can then also continue to make work open access, even if you're not funded. Should we move to the next slide? Worth bearing in mind as well, I'm going to talk about journals and journal articles. I won't be talking about books or book chapters. Essentially, that's because at the moment there is not a funder policy on it, and the monograph and book chapter landscape is very much in its infancy around open access in comparison to journal articles. It is worth being aware that UKRI have announced an open access policy for books and book chapters that will start in autumn of 2020. Hang on, on 20, yeah, it'd be next year. But it is worth being aware that at the moment we don't have any details about it. As we get more information about how that process actually works, who would be eligible, how UKRI are expecting books and book chapters to be made open access, we will inform you when we know how that will actually work. But at the moment we're still a little bit in the dark around the practical aspects of it, so this will be focused entirely on journal articles. So I think the main thing we would want to make sure you are aware of is the key thing is to still choose the publication venue that is the best fit for your research. Before you think of it open access, it's worth having selection strategies around the journals you're targeting. So ways you can do that are looking at journals that have published key articles in your research area, talking to your supervisor and project lead. If you're thinking of open access straight away, I would always urge you to have a look at journals that are indexed by the Directory of Open Access Journals, because that will then tell you, okay, these journals can will make my work open access, and I don't have to think about whether I need to choose it. These journal venues will be open access. So that is a good thing to look at. It's worth being aware these slides that are coming up have a lot of links in them. I'm not expecting you to remember all of this, and the main thing is if you can see it underlined on the slide, that will be an active link that will take you to the right page. So another service you can use, as well as the ones around choosing a journal venue, it's always good to have a look at a site called Think Check Submit. This is a website that gives you a checklist to identify whether the journal is not appropriate for your subject. It's more, is it a reputable journal? Is it a journal that you want to give your research to? Unfortunately, in academic research, because there is potential for money to be involved, there are services, or I don't want to say publishers because they're not even really publishers, but there are companies that will contact you, possibly out of the blue, say they want your research. You get a very generic email, they invite you to a very generic sounding title, and really all they want to do is take some money off you, because they will say, oh, if you pay us £3,000 we can make it open access. The problem with that is, in many cases, these journals do not have an appropriate peer review process. They don't have an appropriate editorial board. And essentially you're wasting your research. And it is such a shame, because if you send your research to a journal like that, in many cases it won't be something that, say, if you continue in academia and you were submitting your work to REF, it would not be submittable to REF because it's in a journal that's not appropriate. So you don't want to waste that research, essentially. So use something like Think Check Submit to see if that is a reputable journal, but then choose the correct journal in terms of the right journal title for your research area. Have a look at the key articles in your research area and speak to your supervisor and project lead. Also, as well as Think Check Submit, I've added here, there's another website called Think Check Attend, specifically focusing on conferences, because again, there are some disreputable companies who again are targeting particularly early career researchers and inviting them to conferences that essentially either don't exist or are not really academic conferences, or inviting you to a conference publication and then charging you a fee for it. So again, use Think Check Attend to see if it is an appropriate venue for you to attend a conference. Other things you can use to inform your selection could involve journal metrics. Journal impact factors are often referred to in these sort of terms. I'm a little bit wary. I think everyone in the library is very wary of relying on metrics as a sole describer of whether a journal is good or not, and we would always urge people to use it responsibly. We in library services have put some advice together on using metrics to inform your choice of journal, and we would always urge you to have a look at that first alongside doing all those other areas. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as we say, choose the journal that's best fit for the research, and also then really consider about making it open access. Obviously, a UKRI emphasises that you publish open access, but it doesn't say you always have to pay for open access. So that's the key thing. particularly around funder compliance. And to be fair, to make work open access in general, you can do it through essentially kind of two routes. One, by having it made open access via the publisher on their platform. And the second is making open access by self-archiving a version of your article in a repository. Now, the first one, where it's on the publisher platform, in some cases, there may be a charge, but not always. There are scholarly-led journals that are entirely run in a way that does not charge authors, but will still make the work open access on their platform. Those are often referred to as diamond journals. And I've got a little link at the bottom of this slide to show that if you are looking for journals that would be classed as diamond, you can go into Directory of Open Access Journals and add a filter, which will say without article processing charges. And those are essentially the phrase you use to refer to open access charges. And that will show you journals that are essentially diamond, and you can also then filter by subject area as well. So I would always recommend having a look at that. So if it's going to be made open access on the publisher platform, it may not require a charge. However, if it is a big publisher, it may be that they do levy a charge. So it's always worth having a check about this first. The other option is to make it open access, as I said, by self-archiving a version of your manuscript in a repository. Now, that can be a subject repository, or it could be an institutional repository. And at Birmingham, we have an institutional repository for all our affiliated research called Pure. And that feeds into something called the research portal that then displays all of that work. When you're self-archiving, that is permitted by pretty much all publishers. That some of them may have restrictions on it, but most of them do allow it. And that the version that you would self-archive into a repository would be what we call the author accepted manuscript. Now, that is usually the version after acceptance, but before the publisher has added any proofing or copy editing to the paper. So probably the last final version, the last final kind of word version of the article that you have. If you're in any doubt whether you've got the right version or not, you can always check with myself and my colleague in the open access team, and we will always have a look at it and kind of let you know if it will be the AAM or not. So those are the two routes. Can we go to the next slide, please? So it's worth being aware of some scenarios, as I said. One, if you're funded, you may need to be, as well as making it open access, you need to make sure it's open access in a way that your funder wants you to make it open access. So in the case of UKRI, as well as it being open access, it needs to be open access immediately, and it needs to be open access under what's called a Creative Commons attribution license. A lot of other funders have those sort of requirements, but if you're funded in any way, whether it's UKRI or not, what we would always urge you to do before you, and do this before you submit to a journal, just to prevent any issues later if there is a problem with that journal in terms of compliance. Before you submit to the journal, we have guidance pages on funders and open access, including UKRI, and that will give you information on what you need to do to ensure compliance. Just to be aware as well, all of these pages we're linking to are all openly available. They are not under any institutional login. So again, once you've moved away, if you're not involved with and don't have a login for Birmingham, it's fine. You can still access these pages and they should still be of use to you. So yeah, so check the funder policy, and then it links to our publishing open access page, which then tells you what you then need to do in terms of ensuring compliance with your funder. And if you're funded, and to be honest, if you're unfunded, what the first place we would suggest is to look at our SCIFE research tool to see if a journal is potentially covered under an agreement. Now, I'll go into the search tool and agreements shortly, but it's essentially the easiest way first to see, okay, where can I publish? Next slide, please. And also, as I said, if your work isn't funded, you can still make the work open access. And I'd always encourage you to, because particularly if you're in a position where you're unfunded, making that work openly available may give you potential funding in future. So again, if your work's not funded, but you're considering open access, it's pretty much the same. Basically, you can either make it open access via a journal on their platform, or you can self-archive your research in a repository. The slight difference we've put on this slide is that UKRI do give us a small, well, not that small, but they give us a block grant to cover publishing charges outside of agreements for funded authors. So UKRI funded authors can apply to us to have that those article processing charges covered. However, if you're unfunded, we don't have a fund for that in most cases. So we would always urge you to have a look and see before you submit. Again, use the search tool and it would tell you whether charges would be covered under any Birmingham agreements before you submit to the journal. But again, it's a case of looking at the publishing open access page and using our SciFree tool. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go into these agreements. So as I said, at Birmingham, we have a number of what we call transition agreements with publishers. And these are essentially agreements where, as well as a subscription, so our cohort can read content, you may also be able to publish open access. So if you are producing work that's affiliated to Birmingham, it may be that these agreements will cover the publish fee for you. Now that does mean then that opens up the number of journals that may be available to you to publish in, because essentially ones that may levy a charge to you for open access, that charge isn't there if it's covered under an agreement. And it's worth being aware, open access charges can be quite large. They can start at, say, £500. They can go up to £8,000 per article. So that's kind of nature. So obviously it's nature. So it's worth being aware these are not small figures. So I think checking this before you submit is really important, so you don't get caught out and you don't end up with an invoice you weren't expecting. So as you can see, there's a lot of titles that are covered under University of Birmingham agreements. And this is the case for, I would say, many UK, many European and other territories also have similar agreements. So if you are co-authoring with another institution, it may be they have a similar set of agreements. So again, it's worth checking with them before you do any submissions. Next slide. Brilliant. So at Birmingham, we have over 30 agreements now covering 12,000 journals. I think that's out of date. I'm pretty sure we're near 15,000 now. But they allow authors, as I said, to publish open access at no additional cost. They are open, generally, they are open to people where the corresponding author is the university, is affiliated to the University of Birmingham, and the submission usually has to be made using a UOB email address. Now, I know that can be difficult if the author list is not affiliated to Birmingham, but as I say, if there's another institution on the affiliation, it is worth having a look to see if they have similar agreements. It's worth being aware these agreements are done at a publisher level, not a journal level. So not all titles a publisher looks after are always included. So because we're aware they're complicated, because we're aware there are differences between the agreements, the University of Birmingham now have a tool called SciFree, which is essentially made, we've invested in to make sure that this is an easy way for authors to see if a journal is covered under these agreements, and if so, to reassure them that then there's no charge, and then what they need to do next to access that agreement. Next slide, please. So this is because I'm terrified of doing a live demo because they never work. So these still are basically two screenshots of a SciFree search. So all you have to do, we have links to this on our open access web pages, but the direct links there, the app.scifree Birmingham. That's a direct link to the search tool. And all you have to do is search the journal you're targeting in the search box and click the little search button to the right. That will then give you if it's included. If it's quite a generic title, you might have quite a long list you need to scroll through. But if you find the title in that list, all you have to do then is select the icon in the Who Pays column. So where it says library and a tick. Now, no spoilers here, but that's a good sign if you see a tick. But always click through, because it will then take you to our intranet page that we've put together for all of these agreements. It will tell you what is covered under the agreement, what the eligibility criteria is for authors. In most cases, as I say, the corresponding author has to be at Birmingham, and then the next steps for authors. Now, if it's in the SciFree tool, essentially you don't have to do anything other in most cases than just submit using a Birmingham email address and then get your paper submitted. Next slide, please. If you do a search and the journal does not appear in the search results, it does not mean that the journal can't make your work open access or that we won't cover the open access charge. It just means it's not covered under our agreements. So then all you have to do is click on the link to the publishing open access web pages that is displayed when you get a result like that, and it will take you to our web page. It will then talk you through. We've got a little subheading which says what if a journal is not in a publisher agreement, and it'll literally take you step by step with what you need to do. In some cases you might apply for an APC to be covered by us through the block grant. It will give you a link to the form, and if you do submit to us, again, this all needs to be done before submission. But if you do submit an APC request form, that comes through to me and my colleague Tom. And if we can cover it, we will then let you know what you need to do with the publisher around the payment of that. If we can't cover it, and bear in mind, if it's funded by UKRI, we are looking at it in terms of UKRI compliance as well. If we're not able to cover the charge, we'll explain to you why, and we'll also then tell you how you can make the work open access in the same journal in most cases, but without paying any charge. So it may be we recommend you self-archive your paper in a repository instead. So those are kind of the two ways that two types of results you'll get through SciFree, and I would urge you to use that as kind of a first port of call, particularly if you have an affiliated Birmingham paper, just to make sure whether that you can have something covered, and we'll essentially have covered the costs through our agreements. So that's kind of the practical kind of non-demo. But as I said, there's a lot of links in what I've said. So we don't expect you to remember this at all. Please use the links. And if you have any questions, there is, if you go to the publishing open access page, you can contact us, you can ask us questions. We are the people who deal with open access all day. That's our job. Your job is to do the research, and our job is to help you get it out there and make it open access as much as we can. So I think that's me. Well, I think I've waffled on enough, basically. So we've now got a sofa. Any questions? Judith, anything more you want to add?
I don't think so, Suzanne. Thank you. That's great. We'll hand back over to Ben to see if there's anything else that he can think of.
No, thank you so much. I learned a lot. This is doing this research stuff is my day job, and there was still a lot in there that I didn't know or was new to me as well. So that's really, really useful. There was just a couple of things on the way through that I picked up just from the network perspective. So you said about blogs on the way through, and that's something absolutely. Actually, the blog you showed, the Birmingham Law School blog, the colleague's face that was up is actually someone who's helped out with the network in various different ways, Felix. So yeah, absolutely, that's one place. We also have hosted and can host blogs on the network website. So if people are interested in that sort of thing, actually not just blogs, podcasts and art, photographs, anything that you've got that you think shows off your research and your project, absolutely, we can host that, and we link that then to lots of other university bits. So there's a really nice link there to other bits that we can do for you in that way. The other thing, just to emphasize, because it links again across the network bit, so you mentioned about asking for help, and I think that's something we're really keen on as well. So if there's bits in it that you don't understand, you would appreciate a steer with. Every project has a mentor, and they are someone who's really well experienced in maybe not the detail of open access, but definitely experienced in publishing, choosing journals. They'll be amazing at, they'll be great at reading a draft of things if that's the sort of thing that's useful for you, and just navigating some of the challenges. So definitely ask for help if that is useful. I had a question which I was going to kick off with, and then others can feed me questions too. It's maybe for you, Suzanne. In the past, I think you've mentioned about waivers, that there might be some journals that are prepared to kind of waive the fee because it's research in the global south in a context they want to support. Is that something you could say just a little bit about?
Yes, some journals do offer waivers if a paper is authored from people in the global south, but it does depend very much on the publisher.
Okay.
Some publishers never offer waivers, but say someone like Public Library of Science are very clear that they want to support equity in publishing, and where their business model is essentially article processing charges will be paid by institutions that can afford it, and from countries that can afford it, and from so they will, I think they do generally offer waivers in the global south. The thing is, you would have to ask that, and you would need to check that when you're submitting to the journal. Others, unfortunately, I think the more commercial publishers are sometimes a little more reticent to do that, but in some cases the editorial board may have some sway as well and say, actually, this work is important and we want to make sure it's published, and we will do it as open access. So I think unfortunately it's one of those, it's very much dependent on the journal, but it's definitely worth looking into. I just can't guarantee you'll always get one that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so maybe another case of kind of thinking about it early, asking for help when you need it, and getting a plan in place, so that you get the right options.
Absolutely, and I think that's the key, is obviously you want to choose the best journal for yourself, but at the same time it's a case of, I think you can kind of do it into, like, at the same time, before you're submitting, you find what journals there are that you want to publish in, find out what open access options are available for you for each of them, and then go through that strategy, because it's research. The first journal you submit to may not accept that paper. You may need to go to another journal. So have that list of journals you want to go through, and understand how you can have it made open access before you submit through that list of journals. If you've gone through the search tool for, say, the first journal you're considering, and you then need to change the journal you're submitting to, please do the same process before you submit, because it may vary. And even sometimes within the same publisher, it might vary. And if it's one where we've said we'll pay a charge and you've had to change journal, please email us and let us know so we can advise you again, because again, the circumstances may be different for the next journal.
It might be £8,000 instead of £500. You got to laugh when you said £8,000. I think everyone went, uh-oh.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's obviously Springer Nature are a massive commercial company, and I don't want to, no, we'll cast aspersions. This is a friendly group. But generally, the bigger the publisher, the more commercial the publisher, the higher the article processing charge they like to levy is, the less likely they're going to offer a waiver. Publishers that are not for profit, so Public Library of Science is a great example of that. They do levy processing charges, but they will offer waivers for people in the global south. And then we go to, as I mentioned, the diamond journals. They are usually entirely academic led, or by a society. They solely want that research to be seen and shared by their peers. So they are doing it all essentially for free. And or maybe they have a charitable fund which is paying for the practical costs, but they won't be charging authors. So it's definitely worth having a look at all of the options. But if you're submitting to a nature journal, they might offer you a waiver, but I think it would be a much higher threshold. They would be expecting you to make a very good case for a waiver, if that makes sense.
Okay. Questions from others? Anyone have about any of this open access publishing, anything around that? Got questions for anyone?
I think it's stunned silence, which is fair enough. I get that a lot.
Very fair. It's a dizzying array of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, but as I said, like this presentation has a lot of links in it, so hopefully that will. And it's often a case of having those links available at the point when you're suddenly going, I want to publish something, and hopefully that you can use that at whatever when you get to the point of needing to publish.
The Think, Check, Submit one, that was a new link. That was one of the things that I've never come across, and that's really, really useful because there are so many. It was something that was in the back of my mind, and just as it was there, you said it, which is around those kind of sometimes predatory journals who are kind of
Totally.
trying to make money off people and not act. Sometimes it almost looks like a really nice offer. Someone saying, "Oh, you're very important. Would you like to publish with us?" And that's a really useful website to just check that it's not just playing to your ego. It is actually a real journal and somewhere you want to get involved with.
Brilliant.
Okay. If there's no other questions, Judith, sorry, you've unmuted. Was that for a question or
just to say that I'll send that presentation with all those links in to both you and Kirsten, and then you can distribute, either put it on Teams or whatever you do to get it out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I wanted to say a huge thank you again to Suzanne and Judith. They look after thousands of people across the university, so it's really appreciated that they take the time out to teach us and get us up to speed with some of the complexities around this. So thank you very, very much.
Oh no, it's been a pleasure.
Definitely. Thank you very much for asking us.
And for everyone else, we'll have our next session around a month. And again, if there's other ones that you've missed or haven't had a chance to tune in for, definitely worth going back to the recordings and looking through them, because we've had some really, really useful stuff over the time. And in the meantime, take care. Bye, everyone.
Good to see everyone. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.